All right, so my name is Joe Hall, and this is my ghost story. The following is the series of events that occurred from about, I don't know, early 90s to the early 2000s, and it occurs at the end of Hall Hill Road in a little house in Adair County, Oklahoma. And the more time that passes between now and these events, the more sometimes I look back and wonder about them. There are certain ones that are undeniable, and there's certain ones that you almost want to convince yourself that maybe you made up or maybe they didn't happen. But I have, thankfully, several other people that were around at the time that can kind of help verify this, and I even reached out to a couple of them before I decided to do this, and just brought up certain things, and they remembered a few things that help you reassure yourself that you're not crazy. So I'm just putting this story out there. Whether anyone believes it or not is completely not my business. But I did just, I felt like I wanted to tell my story. So to really encapsulate this entire story, you got to go back, like I said, pretty far. In the spring of '89, we moved from the little house we were in Cincinnati, Arkansas, just across the state line, into Adair County, Oklahoma, and we moved into a little house there. Like I said, it was not Hall Hill Road at the time, but it got that name a little while later. But we moved in there. I was about 9 years old, and nothing started right away. It was a year or two before I noticed anything. It was probably 1991 or so. I was about 11 years old, and the very first events that I ever really noticed were just kind of at night, the sounds of things moving. I would think I heard something scooting across the desk, or maybe something falling over, or maybe a book, falling out of the shelf, and there, turn on the light and there's the book on the floor. Odd things like that. In the house we lived in before over in Arkansas, I'd never experienced anything like that. That fear of anything like that was totally unknown to me. This was all brand new, so I didn't know what to make of it quite at first. And another one of the very earliest things that would happen, and this was the most consistent thing throughout this whole 2-decade long ordeal. I was a little over a decade ordeal, would be as soon as you walked into my room. If you hear anything on the side, that's my dog. As soon as you walked into my room, there would be just this bare naked light bulb sticking out of the ceiling. Not anything fancy. We were fairly poor, and the house was very old, and it had an old tin roof. A lot of history with the house, which may help explain this entire story. But you walk in there, and there's it just had the light chain. You pull the light chain on, it turned the light on. And everyone's familiar with that sound that you pull the chain, you let it go to turn the light on, and it clanks against the glass bulb. And so one of the earliest things was that sound. I would be asleep, or almost asleep, and I would hear that sound, and I would look up, and there'd be enough light from the moon and whatever, my TV would sometimes be on. I would see this chain kind of dangling like something had hit it. And that happened often. I mean, sometimes it was almost every night. And one of this story overall has a lot of smaller stories within it, but the biggest of those smaller stories, I call it the ring story. So I had this red plastic ring that I'd gotten, and I tied it on the end of that light chain one day just to, I guess, make it easier to pull the light on. Or, I wasn't going to wear a giant red plastic ring, so I tied it up there. And so that, preceded kind of what started with this. And that was almost every night for quite a long time. I would hear that, and I would see it, and it would swing until it stopped, and then it would just be hit again. It was like an invisible cat was up there playing around with it or something. So at this point, I'm pretty freaked out. And by the way, to help me not feel like I was going crazy, I had this little Chihuahua mix, this little black dog named Midnight. And almost all the occurrences that happened with, whether it be the light chain or like it sounded like a book falling or just hearing a strange sound, she would look in that direction and she would bare her teeth and lay back her ears and growl. And that was even freakier, but it also helped me kind of, reassure myself that maybe I wasn't going crazy, even if it's an animal. But there were other people too in that time, because I had friends over all the time. I had friends that saw stuff like this. We might get into that a little more later. But yeah, there was also the door. Like I said, it was kind of an older house. The door was always loose on the hinges to my bedroom, so it would drag the carpet real bad. There was like an indentation in the carpet, so you'd have to pick up on the door handle to open or shut this door. And there were many times when I'd be laying in bed and the door would shut. I only explain that because, I try to explain these things away then and now when I think back on it. Maybe it was this. Maybe that glass moving across the desk was condensation under it that had built up. Maybe the book, I didn't put it on the shelf as much as I thought I did. Maybe the ring on the chain with the light was a little harder to explain away. I'm not really sure what would cause that. But, I did try to explain things in my mind. But yeah, it's not like a breeze would blow that door shut or open, because it was not easy to shut. It took a little bit of effort. So by this time, I'm telling my parents about it. I live with my grandparents. They were much older. They're like in their 70s at this time. They're very religious. And so my mom's answer to this, and I don't know if she really believed what was going on or just thought I have an overactive imagination, or I don't know what she thought really. But she did come in there and begin reading Bible verses at night and stuff. And she would leave a Bible laying on my nightstand. But that didn't seem to change anything. And then there were several years there where I didn't even sleep in my room. I slept on the couch in the den. And the den was like, it shared a wall with my parents' room. So it was like as close as I could possibly get to sleeping by my parents without sleeping with my parents. And I did that for quite a while. And then there was about a good 2-year span where I would sleep in my room, but only if my dad would come there and sleep with me. But it may not have even been 2 years, because I think he got kind of tired of that pretty quick. But they ended that. But needless to say, there was a lot of stuff going on back there, and I was not a fan of being back in my room. But then there was a couple of other things that there was one thing that happened that wasn't even in the room. I was, like I said, we were fairly poor, and we didn't have air conditioning at the house I grew up in Arkansas. And we didn't have air conditioning in this house either when we first moved in. It was several years. I was probably 13 or 14 or something before we got a window unit in the living room. And it was like July or something. Like, it was really hot when we got that window unit. And man, like, I felt like we were the Rockefellers. When we had like ice cold air blowing in on the couch, it was incredible. Like, it was incredible. And so that's where I slept for quite a while after that. I slept on that couch in front of that AC unit. And that's where I was all the time watching TV. And so I was there one night and watching TV. And to my right, as plain as day, I mean, I can still see it when I close my eyes, I saw a person walk from, I guess it would be left to right, if you're facing them, from the living room back down the hall into my bedroom. And just a couple minutes later, I get up, I walk into the kitchen, and there's my parents sitting at the kitchen table playing dominoes. And they were the only two people in the house. So I thought that was a little strange. And I was like, well, maybe one of them went to the restroom and came back and I missed it. And I asked Mom and Dad, have either of you gotten up recently? Did either one of you just go through to the bathroom? And they were like, no, we've been here playing dominoes for like an hour. So that was pretty creepy. That was really the only figure I ever saw. And like I said, it wasn't like a good sighting. It was just peripheral, the shape of a body. That's all I can give you. I have no details about it.
She's got a story to tell. She's like, you're scaring me over here.
This is not about you, Stormy. All right? So fast forward to several years later, the stuff, kept occurring throughout my teens. I feel like it did slow down a little bit. Either it did that or I just kind of got more used to things. But I even went back to sleeping in my room when I was 15, 16, 17. But yeah, let's fast forward to like 2001. my father passed away in October of that year, and in December of that year, I got married to my first wife. And the house that we had purchased, which was not far away, but it was not ready yet to be moved into. So for just a few months, 4 months, she moved in with us into that house. My mom now, my newly widowed mom, myself, and my new wife. And she had seen a few things before also because, we'd been dating for like 3 years and she'd been at the house quite a bit. And so she was not totally foreign to the things that were going on there. But when she moved into the house, I can honestly say she's the only person that whatever was going on in there did not seem to like. I'd felt uneasy in there as a kid and stuff, but I don't know. Nothing had ever happened to me to make me fearful or anything like that. But so I was in a band at the time, and I was out playing music. And when I got home, she's sitting out on the porch. And it was cold that day, and she'd been out there for quite a while. So, I asked her what's going on, and she had been taking a shower and got out of the shower in that little bathroom in that house. And she told me that as she was drying off, something had 2 hands on her back, shoved her out of the door and into the hallway. And she just grabbed her towel, ran out. And so that was pretty concerning. There was another time involving her where she was, I hope I'm remembering this right, she was writing a letter to a friend, and back in our room, and while she was doing that, she heard children chattering, and so she got real quiet, and she said it sounded like it was coming from the corner or maybe just out the window. She heard a little girl crying, and so needless to say, that freaked her out. So that was another time when I get home and she's outside. She doesn't want to go back in the house, and we kind of moved out and moved into our new house that we just bought ahead of schedule. And also, before anyone knocks me for leaving my newly widowed mother in a haunted house, it wasn't quite like that, because she never experienced anything at all, except for, I mentioned that my father had passed away. A month or two after that, she heard his voice, and she was in her room asleep. And he always called her mama, like through my whole childhood. And she said she heard that just clear as day. And she sat up in bed, and she just sat there for a minute. And then she heard him say it again. And even then, she was not frightened whatsoever. In fact, she was kind of comforted. To her, it was kind of a blessing. And so she just went to sleep, and she was fine. Nothing ever happened to her. So I didn't really have any reservations about moving and leaving her, and nothing, she lived there a few more years and nothing ever happened to her there. So yeah, it was April of 2002, and my wife and I moved out. And so after we did that, I was working at this little municipality, this little utility in a town over there. And it turns out that the woman, the office manager, is the person who we bought the house from back in '89. And so one day, I hadn't spoken to her about anything that had happened in that house, but one day I asked her, I was like, did you have anything weird happen to you in that house way back when you were living there? And she said a couple times, and she said the one that sticks out in my mind the most is she had been riding a horse, and she got thrown from the horse and hurt her back. And so for 3 or 4 days, she was laid up. And she's like, I was on a couch or a bed in that back bedroom, which was my room. And she said there was a couple of times where I would be watching TV or just trying to read or something, and I would hear what sounded like a little kid crying. And so I was just like, oh my God. So I told her what had just happened with my wife, and so that was pretty crazy. Like I said, there's certain things that happen throughout this that kind of help you realize that you're not crazy, or you're not making things up in your head or whatever. Things that kind of help verify that. I'm trying to remember how much longer my mother lived in that house before she moved out, but it was just a few years. I want to say this was like before my daughter was born, probably '04. This may be wrong, but when she did move out of the house, she sold the house to the brother of my coworker. I worked with a guy named Luke, and she sold the house to his brother. And so she's moved out. I'm working with him. About 6 months go by after she's moved out, and I told Luke, I was like, hey, can we run by the old house? I want to talk to your brother. I want to see what they've done with the place. And I kind of want to ask him, I was curious if he had had anything happen to him. And now, granted, I'd never told any of my experiences to, I barely knew his brother. I'd been around his brother a couple times. I didn't tell him my experiences to him. I don't know if I told much of them to my buddy, that I was with. So anyway, we go out to my old house, and the new owner's name was Brian. Brian was there, and I asked him, had anything weird happened in this house since you moved in? And he said, a couple things, like I'd set down a screwdriver when I was working on something, and I would go do something, and then I can't find the screwdriver, and I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, but I've done that. People do that all the time. So, all right. But then he said the craziest thing, and this is the crux of the whole story. This is the thing. This is the crazy thing. He had worked on his truck one day. His hands were greasy, so he goes in the little bathroom, takes his high school ring off, and washes his hands. He said, I forgot about my ring after I did that, so I just go about my day. And he said later on that day, I'm like, oh yeah, my ring. So he goes in there to the bathroom. It's not on the sink anymore. It's nowhere. He looks around for it. He looks everywhere. His wife helps him look. And I can't remember when they found it. It might have been that day. It might have been the next day. But he said, do you know where we found it? And this is the part where I'm like, I'm not concerned who believes this or who doesn't. This is what happened. I get chill bumps to this day when I tell this story. He said, we found that ring tied to the end of that light chain in the back room. Okay? And so I'm like, I don't know. I can't, it's hard to explain. I was just like, I was flushed, Even now, it's just like, even saying it, it sounds like, if I were listening to this, I'd be like, okay, that's nice, really good. I wouldn't believe it. I probably wouldn't believe it. But that's what happened. And, I called Luke before I did this, just to make sure. I was like, listen, man, level with me. I'm like, I'm about to do a YouTube story with this. I'm about to put this out there. You didn't know about that story, did you? You didn't tell him. And, he's still, this was what, 20 something years ago. He still swears to Christ to this day that he had no idea, and that his brother had no idea. So I believe my buddy, and I believe that still. So yeah, that was the crux of the whole thing right there. That was the craziest part of the story for me. And like I said, we moved out of there. Nothing else happened. I haven't spoken to him really since that day, Brian, that had bought that house. And I don't know who lives in it now or if anything has happened to them. But all I can say is those were my experiences in the house on Hall Hill Road. And I try to convince myself to this day that maybe certain things didn't happen, or I haven't really had anything like that happen to me since I left that house. But yeah, take it or leave it. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if you know what to make of it, but I at least wanted to put the story out there so it exists somewhere out there in the ether. And yeah, there's my story, the haunted house on Hall Hill Road.